Good morning and welcome back to Compound Conversations. I'm Jesse Flores.
And I'm Julie Mann.
And today we are talking about the hybrid accountability chart. Now, if you're like most people, you're wondering what the heck does that even mean? And uh, that's a great question because I think it's not a thing anybody's really thinking about at the
Right,
moment. So
right.
the origin of this came from EOS, right, which has an accountability chart, and your accountability chart in an EOS organization is one where you have a person or a role rather, and inside of the role, you define what the outcomes are for that role. And the idea is to know who's accountable for what outcomes in an organization.
Right.
But as your organization starts to introduce a new kind of worker or a new kind of workflows that are synthetic, that are not human, well, those also need accountability.
Right. They need a space.
They need a space and they need an owner. And so today we're going to talk about what that looks like when you are starting to integrate or implement this kind of dual workforce.
Hmm. Well, and it's interesting because, if you think about the org chart, I've been in HR forever. Org charts have been in HR forever. They've never changed. They look the same. They're just this document and this thing that's people have. But the org chart was not designed for AI.
Right.
And so, like you were saying, you put the EOS model, you put, the accountability, and it just isn't on the chart. And so we have to start thinking about, that's why we call it the hybrid accountability chart. We came up with that name, but we came up with the hybrid accountability chart because we need to start identifying the worker, the human. Here's what the human is doing. Here's what the agentic person, AI agent is doing. And then, like you said, that person somebody has to own that work
Yes.
that's being done.
And what's different about this technology, so why don't we have an accountability chart for our ERP, right, or our CRM? What's different is discretion, because this particular technology is capable of making decisions and generating outputs that can direct in a way that just sort of normal form-based data entry systems don't. And so because of that, we need to start thinking about what this looks like. Now, to do this, it's only a couple of steps, but the chart itself is pretty simple. It's only got 4 elements: the role or the function or the outcome that you want to be held accountable, the agent or agent team that is responsible for that outcome, the human supervisor, because there's always a human who is responsible for the performance of an agent and an agentic team, even if the team is running autonomous, and we'll talk about that later. And then the level at which that team is allowed to operate, whether it is assisted, whether it's human in the loop, whether it's fully automated, that level can vary. But those are the 4 things you want to be thinking about when you're putting together this kind of a chart.
Right, right.
As with all things, we start with outcomes.
Yeah, we have to. There again, right? Well, and if you think about how most organizations, just to go back one step,
Yep.
how most organizations have deployed AI, and that's one of those things that we've spent a lot of time talking about, right?
Yeah.
A tool gets procured.
Yep.
Maybe there's a rollout. Maybe we understand the outcomes. But again, that accountability piece is where we're really missing, which is why, we've said we need to break that down, because the org chart says, who does what, who has what role, who reports into who's accountable for what goes wrong,
Yep.
right? I mean, all of those things come back to the org chart, but it's not as naturally coming back with AI, but yet it's very important because
Yes.
you have to have the human supervisor. And so, think of an org chart. I mean, if you took it at its most simple form, if you took an org chart and every box had two pieces to it, right? I mean, you could go as simple as that, but what we understand is that we have to do some other things to understand that role.
Yes. Yeah. And particularly because what you'll start to see, I think, is as more and more humans start working with more and more agents, even your most junior employees today who don't manage
Right.
people, they will be managing teams.
Right.
And I'll use a very, very simple example. at a very, very simple agent team,
Hmm.
right? So we have a very small agent team that files videos for us. And you might say, like, why that's a surprising thing I would use an agent for. Well, we produce a ton of content,
Right.
right? We're filming all of these videos. Every one of these is multiple tracks. And then we're filming all the other things on top of it for ads and yada, 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 right? And because information hygiene is very important,
Hmm.
it's very important that we keep everything organized.
Right.
The problem with that is that everybody's organizational schema is different. I might look at a file system and think it should be done this way. Harley looks at it that way. You might look at it another way. And what ends up happening is before long, your dozens, hundreds of videos now are impossible to find, which makes things very slow.
Right.
Right. So we have an agent team that basically sits on a computer and just files
Yeah.
for us. And so
Right.
Harley will record these videos. She'll drop them into a folder, and then our agent team looks at it and says, this video is this kind of a thing, and then starts to file it automatically. And then that way we all know exactly where things are going.
Right.
It's a very simple team. But Harley manages that team.
Right.
And um, that team is ultimately, at the end of the day, she is responsible for keeping our data organized. That's her accountability as the human.
Right.
But this team is responsible for making sure the data is being organized in the way that we stipulated
Hmm.
previously.
Right.
Right. So we have an outcome,
Right.
which is data must be organized in a specific way. We have a human supervisor,
Right.
Harley, who is responsible for that outcome. But in the middle is this agent
Right.
team that is doing that work every time she drops a thing in. And then at the end of the day, that is something that is a pretty automated process
Right.
that she doesn't have to think that much about
Right.
once we're moving.
But she has to own it.
But
Right.
she has to own it.
Yeah. And that I think is where we're saying like today's a traditional org chart, right? It's a design omission,
Mhm.
right? Like we're not thinking about that work because at the end of the day, we need to know who's accountable for it. And if something wrongs, where do we goes wrong? Where do we go to get it fixed, right?
Right.
As you get more of these things embedded, you've got to say who is their human orchestrator we talk about, right? Who's the human orchestrator that is behind this work? And it's very important to like lay that out.
100%. And you cannot move towards agentification in any kind of responsible way if you don't know what that looks like.
Right.
So we talk about one kind of simple outcome. I'll give just one more example because I think sometimes it's easy. It's better to give examples of how these things work so you can see the pieces come together. So another thing. So every day, so we run Facebook ads, and every single day I want to know how the campaign is doing, so I can decide on a week over week basis how it's what adjustments we need to make. But I want to know on a given day, just like what does that variability look like.
Mm-hmm.
So every single day at 7 a.m., I get a text message with a report that's been compiled by a team of agents that has looked at ad spend, looked at conversion rates, looked at the funnel from a couple of different perspectives. Right. So the outcome that I'm looking for is I want a daily status report
Mm-hmm.
of our advertising performance.
Right.
We've got a team that sits in that is producing this for me. Ultimately, in this case, I'm responsible for
Right.
the performance of that team because I'm the
Right.
one controlling the budget
Right.
for that. And that is again, a fully automated thing. So these kinds of agentic teams, right? So I like to give these examples
Mm-hmm.
because I think it can sound so, I don't know. I think it can be so like, what is it like? What is an agent? How does that work? I
Right.
get asked that question
Right. I
all
do
the
too.
time.
Yes.
What does
Yes.
that mean? Like,
Yes.
what does that look
Right.
like? Right.
Right.
And I think most people don't have a conception for what
Mm-hmm.
this looks like. So I think the more stories we can give, the easier it is to say,
Right.
oh, wait, you can have an agent do
Do
that.
that. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but these are the outcomes that I wanted. Right.
Right.
The outcome that I wanted is every day I wanted a performance report on how our ad campaign is doing. I don't ever want to waste time looking for videos. So I want our videos to always be organized. These are outcomes that are really important, right? They're end states. They're not
Mm-hmm.
tasks.
Right.
The task
Right.
isn't compile a report. The task isn't file videos. The outcome
Right.
is report is completed. The outcome is um, that the videos are filed. The outcomes are our status reports are done for project management, or et
Right.
cetera, right?
Right.
So that's step number one. Is you got to get
Right.
really clear on the outcome.
Right. Right. Well, and I want to go back because you and I have these conversations with people all the time. And, you know, people say, I'm using AI
Mhm.
at work. And for the majority, not all, but a good majority of people right now are using chat or pilot or Gemini or, Claude, depends upon their organizational structure, right?
Yep.
Um, but they're using it to help them individually
Yes,
do a little something a little faster,
that's right.
right? So, again, just kind of put examples. Write me an email to somebody that says XYZ, ABC, and polish it up so it sounds good so I can send this off. And by the way, I'm sending it to a CEO level person,
Mhm.
right? Like, and then all of a sudden this email comes up and you're like, wow, I sound pretty good, right?
Yep.
But that's using it as just an efficiency tool. Like
Yes.
when we're talking about hybrid accountability charts, when we're talking about understanding role functions, outcomes, that is when you're starting to use your synthetic layer in a much different way for
Yes.
operational efficiency, organizational efficiency,
Yes.
not individual efficiency.
Exactly.
And so I just, because a lot of people ask that. I mean, that's one of the things. Like, well, I have it. And I'm like, how do you use it? And so, the world is coming, the agent teams, and it's coming very quickly, as
Yes.
we know, are
Yes.
going to be part of that organization. And so that's why we're saying if we're going to have these agent teams, we have to account for in the hybrid accountability chart, we have to account for what they're doing, what outcomes they're producing, and who's responsible for that. Because if not, we're just putting in tools.
I love that distinction that you made between the person using chat, Gemini, whatever, and the person using and what I was describing, right?
Hmm.
Because it is easy to think about AI as one thing, and most of us, our experience is with a chatbot. And you could, if you really press me, I could say yes. If you are using Claude as a partner to do a task, Claude is an agent. If you press me hard enough, I would probably say that's technically probably true.
Right.
But when we're talking about agents and when I'm thinking about agents, I love what you talk about with the organizational or operational efficiency at that layer.
Hmm.
You are now starting to go a step beyond
Yes.
Julie working with Claude,
Hmm.
Harley working with Copilot, Jesse working with Chat GPT.
Right.
Like that's fine at this level.
Right.
And you can get value out of that. I would never turn off my Claude subscription at this point.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I don't think many will. Right. I
There is
mean,
value
right.
to that.
Right. Right.
But what we're talking about here, and I love the distinction you made, is there is a level beyond that.
Hmm.
The level beyond that is when you start to bring these things into these systems. And I think where you start to see a distinction is, and I hadn't thought about this until you just said this. I think the distinction starts to be when you have to cross system boundaries or departmental boundaries,
Hmm.
and when you have to introduce dynamic workflows, right?
Hmm.
And so take something like filing a video. That sounds like it should be easy, but it's
Hmm.
not. Like, how do you name it? Do you name it by date? What if I want to reuse that video for a different campaign?
Hmm.
Well, do I put the footage in one place, but does the export go into a different place? Well, what about the graphics that support that video?
Right.
Does it matter whether or not we are using CapCut, which stores information this way, or Filmora, which does it that way? Like, these sound like trivial decisions. And as humans, we just sort of muddle through it. I'm thinking through different ways people have shared their Google Drives with me. And I look at their drives and I'm like, what the hell is this? I have no idea what I'm looking at. And then I spend a bunch of time emailing back and forth, like, where is this in your drive? Where is this in your drive? Where is it? Right? So like that sounds
Right.
super simple, but the level of decisions that you have to make, because it immediately just something that simple
Yes.
has to align around 3 people minimum,
Hmm.
right? Has to align across multiple technology platforms.
Mhm.
at a minimum.
Mhm.
And it involves multiple steps. We have to download the thing, we have to file the thing, we have to think of the taxonomy for the thing, right? And so that boundary line between what I would call an agent, and when you start thinking about agents into your infrastructure, I think I appreciate your distinction between human A using chatbot A,
Mhm.
but the level below that is now we need to start crossing.
Right.
We need to start crossing these boundaries. And the real efficiency comes from just think about something like how much time do you spend looking for a file?
Right. Right.
Um, right. I say this all the time. Like so much of this for me started because I hate searching for things. I find it to be such a waste of time.
Exactly. That's why we have the key bowl.
That's
That's
what.
why we have, right? Places where things go because you don't like looking for them. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
love the distinction. Um, But now the next thing is you give that agent team a name. So we've got in this particular case, I've got my Facebook ads reporting team.
Mhm.
In the case of the video thing, we've got the video filing team. And part of this is what it allows you to just remember,
Mhm.
um, because you would not. I mean, I don't know. You're in HR. Maybe this isn't true, but I can't imagine you would hire somebody into a company and then like not have any records of them.
Right. No, probably not. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
we just and it's the same thing with these agents because if and when and by the way, I made this mistake early on because you just get so excited, like, oh, I can build this thing, I can build this thing, I can build this thing. And then all of a sudden you've got all of these integrations and all of these agents and something breaks, like, I don't have no idea
Right. Right.
where the heck that is.
Oh,
I have
right.
no clue. Right.
Right.
And that was part of what made us start thinking about the accountability chart was I started
Mhm.
thinking through the inventory of agents that I have and
Right.
I don't know. I don't know who's doing what and where they are.
Right. Right.
Right?
Right. Right.
So it sounds like common sense,
Right.
but
But it's not. I mean, I was thinking about when you were talking about the file example. Like every single one of us has walked into a new company and they say, "Here's Joe's computer and here's Joe's files and here's your password and here's this," right? And then you go in there and like you said, you can't find like what does this file folder even mean, right? And so now you're opening it up and you're like, oh, he meant to say that's where all the benefits detail is kept, or he meant, like you just it's and that's very unique to people, right?
yes.
Everybody's methodology for creating files,
Hmm.
right, is very unique to them.
Yeah.
And then like we move to the AI deployment side, we're saying that will be a unique deployment, but how we capture and account for that, we have to have a methodology
You
to do
absolutely
that.
do.
Because otherwise, we're going back to let's just deploy tools, deploy tools, as opposed to stepping back and saying, what are we trying to accomplish? Who owns what? And understanding those outcomes and therefore, how does it fit into the system?
Well, and if you don't deploy methodology, you will start burning a lot of time and ultimately tokens
Hmm.
trying to recreate
Right.
context every single time.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So good.
Oh, I was just to say, like most organizations, my opinion, think about AI deployment in the order of what can we buy, what can we try, and what can we scale.
Hmm.
I think that's like when people are thinking about, oh, I had an AI deploy, they kind of go through this thing. And the correct order is really like, what do we need? Who owns it? Like, that's a really important thing. Who's going to own it? How does it connect to the human work? And then do we buy it? Do we build or do we buy? And that's a very different way of thinking about AI deployment
Yes.
because we can't just go to, what can we buy? What can we try? We've got to think about the work first.
Hmm.
How many times we have to design before deploy, design before deploy. We've got to think about the work first because
Yes.
again, that's how we see P&L impact. And that's why every company does everything that they try. It's all about managing that P&L and how do we make those tools work better for us. So the hybrid accountability chart, it's a different methodology of thinking about the work getting done and laying out who's doing what. But it's absolutely critical if when you're thinking about deployment, you're asking the questions in the right way.
Yes. 100%. 100%. And not having that methodology, not thinking about it the right way, ultimately actually ends up being considerably more expensive.
Right.
We've talked before that right now AI is heavily subsidized,
Mm-hmm.
and um, you can afford to be a little sloppy
Mm-hmm.
because you're not really paying that much on a per unit basis yet.
Right. Right.
Um, Now it does take a lot more time when you're
Mm-hmm.
sloppy, but it's still automated, right?
Right. Right.
Um, what what I think this sort of methodology is forcing us to do is to say, look, before it becomes a problem,
Mm-hmm.
get ahead of it.
Exactly.
Get ahead of it.
Exactly.
You've got to you're starting to implement these things. You know what problems you're trying to solve because you've done a pretty good job of your constraint statement. You've done a pretty
Mm-hmm.
good job of identifying your signals, right? You know what problems you're trying
Well,
to
we
solve.
hope they
Well, you hope.
have.
But now that you're ready to start letting the rubber hit the road, now you do need to take a disciplined approach to
Mhm.
which agents exist and what do they do, and especially when they are teams. And then the next part is who's the human that is
Mhm.
responsible for that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, it's important to recognize that the human who is responsible for the outcome might not be the same human who builds the thing.
Correct. Correct.
Right. So, for example, I'll go back to our Harley example here. Harley is responsible for keeping our files organized. And if the agent is doing something crazy, it's her responsibility to flag that.
Mhm.
It's not her responsibility to build it. I built that team
Right.
for her. She can tell me, hey, look, this thing is not doing what I need it to do in the same way you would in a human organization, right? If a particular person isn't performing, it's the supervisor or the manager's job to identify the problem,
Mhm.
right? And in that case, they can coach the solution. And I imagine that particularly, I don't want to age shame here, but I imagine particularly younger employees will get better
We
at
call that earlier in career.
call that what early in
Earlier
career.
in early in career.
We'll get better. We'll get better at learning how to manage these teams and coach these teams because it's just going to become part of the job
Right. Right.
going forward.
Oh
But
yeah.
but for now, her responsibility would just basically just be to say, hey, this isn't doing what I expect it to do, or I need it to do this other thing that we didn't think about. And
Mhm.
then someone that has a little bit more experience, like myself, could then work with her to
Right.
make that happen. 3 years from now, hopefully she's doing that
Right.
on her own,
Right. Right.
right? That's part of her professional development.
Well, and when you put an agent into a workflow, like when you build that, right? I mean, what I see is that like you start working with it, and then the more you work, you're like, oh, it can also do this, and it can also do this.
Mhm.
So like the agent has a development curve and a development plan, if you want to say, like the human.
Yes.
I mean, your humans are going to develop. And like you said, with hopes is 3 years from now, she can do it herself, right? But the agent's also going to develop. And then it's going to develop at a different pace depending upon, again, the outcomes that are coming. Like, oh, if it can do this, I bet it can do this.
Yes.
And that's kind of like the maturity curve of agents, which is just a wonderful thing. But to your point, which I thought was really great, like it doesn't mean that's that same person.
Right. That's
But
right.
but it is a natural part of having that embedded in your organization.
Well, and I think too, what you said about the maturity curve is super interesting as well because it changes so quickly. I mean, I was talking to my development team the other day about um, dynamic workflow and orchestrated environments, and we were doing a debrief on uh, some new features that, in this case, Claude had provided. But we are actively trying to manage our dependence on Claude.
Mhm.
We like a lot of people. We got real. We love Claude Code. We use it. We also use Open Code, and we use a bunch of other tools. But we really like Claude. It's a great product.
That's a great
It's a great
product.
product.
Yeah.
Um, but about a week ago, Claude went down for an hour.
Oh, I know. It was terrible.
Right? It went down for an hour. And it was kind of one of those things where it like slapped us awake to say, hey, you know what? You
Right.
guys have been getting a little bit too comfortable. Now we actually do have fail safes for that. So we've
Mhm.
got other tools we can use.
Right.
But like at first you spent 20 minutes being like, Claude, are you really down? And like
Exactly.
you're
Yeah. Yeah.
refreshing,
You're
like,
just like,
Claude,
yeah.
like refreshing the status. Claude, are you
Right.
sure you're down? Like, what can I do,
That's good.
buddy? Let me
Right.
give you a
Right.
pep talk,
Yeah.
right?
Right. You need some
And
water? What do you
uh,
need? Yeah.
um, and but we were talking about this as a team the other day. I was saying this is foreshadowing what's to come.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you aren't thinking about your agents, and this is another reason, by the way, to why you want to document your agent teams,
Mm-hmm.
is because if and when providers either go down and they're running a mission critical part of your business,
Mm-hmm.
you need to have a fail safe, right?
Exactly.
When you're building agent teams like this, one of the nice things is when you're building agent teams like this and they're running in the DNA of your company, you can swap the model like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
very straightforward to
Mm-hmm.
do, generally pretty quick. Um, but the other side of that is when they become really, really expensive, you don't want to find that report that was generating, taking $5 a report
Right.
is now running $50 a report. You might ultimately want to make some different decisions there as
Mm-hmm.
well,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I think, I think keeping this inventory early on
Mm-hmm.
is going to say it is. What is it they say? I always get the saying wrong, and you've corrected me more than once
Uh,
about the
I,
pound of prevention or cure or whatever it
yeah,
is. But that, like,
yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
right, like you want to just be prepared before
Right.
you need to be
Yeah.
prepared.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's so important. And, you know, we've had meetings with clients before. And when we go into a client, I mean, I think it's very typical of it starts out with something like, how can we use AI?
Yes,
And that is such a broad question that it can take you a lot of different areas. And so, what we tend to do through things like, discussions around accountability and whatnot is, what do we need? What are you hoping? What's the problem? What's the signal? Right.
yes,
And that's why this whole process, the 6-step process is so important because we can't just go into build.
correct.
And when we do, it just doesn't work. And then people go, oh, I put in AI and it didn't work. You're like, well, or did we not put it in right? Did we not have enough forethought, accountability charts, signaling the problem, understanding the data sources? Did we not have enough of those things
Yeah.
done before we got there? Because it's usually, how can I use AI?
Yes. It's well, and I think part of it is because people don't know what the problem space can even
Hmm.
what it even contains,
Exactly.
right? Which is why I'll mention something as prosaic as a filing agent, right?
Hmm.
Which right now we have humans doing that.
Right.
And then humans talking about the inefficiencies that come with doing it. As all the way through to our project management agents, which are managing entire project life cycles.
Right.
Right. In fact, one of my goals for this year is to have one of our business lines be completely driven by AI. Like where humans almost never have to touch it.
Hmm.
And part of that's just to see if I can.
Right.
Because
Right. Yeah.
it also helps us to understand the problem space. And that brings us to the last part about the autonomy level, which
Hmm.
is this where is this on the spectrum? So I was talking actually, I think with Harley about this the other day, that there's sort of a spectrum that exists between completely interactive on one end, and this is how most of us use Chat GPT or Claude today,
Hmm.
and fully automated on the other
Right.
end. So there's kind of a spectrum in between that, and the spectrum in between that is the extent to which the human is actively guiding the process,
Hmm.
right? So might have AI assisted on one end or completely interactive on one end and then fully automated on the other end. So as you're building out your hybrid accountability chart, wanting to have some sense for, well, where do we need to have a human able to participate? That in a lot of ways, a lot of cases, is going to be a strategic decision,
Hmm.
an operations decision, and a values decision.
Right. Well, and every AI workflow needs a named human orchestrator,
That's right.
not a team, not a department, not a function, a person. You
Yes.
have to have a person. And then again, that's one of those things that we're missing, right? Like we put that in and we didn't assign it to a person. So I think that's one of those things that's the person's responsible for the quality of the outcomes. And so, again, like you said, they don't have to do it, but they're responsible for that outcome. So there has to be a person.
Yes.
And on that spectrum, helping to figure out what that looks like, if we say like AI assisted, like
Mhm.
that example I gave earlier of somebody helps me write an email,
Yep.
right? Like that's an assistance to the role. But when you talk about the agent doing the filing, that's like a fully automated role,
That's right.
but you still need that human
Yes.
and it's a person.
Yes.
A lot of times I'll say, oh, well, so HR is responsible for that or finance is responsible for that. That's not, how many people are in HR and finance? Like you can't even just say that because at the end of the day, then who do you go to and say, hey, this isn't working? So it's same with the AI deployment. You have to name a person.
First and a last name.
Yeah,
Let's just
exactly.
like, Beyonce. But
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah,
uh,
exactly. Yeah.
and so there's two ways I think to approach this. So on the human side, right? That person, do they understand so the three questions? Do they understand the work that the agent's supposed to do well enough? Do they get it? Do they
Mhm.
see it? Do they understand what good looks like?
Right.
Secondly, do they want it? Like, do they actually want to be doing the job?
Hmm.
Right. Now, that's not specific to the agent. That's in general,
Right.
right? That's probably just good management,
Hmm.
you know? And then finally, like, do they actually have the judgment and context? Are they suited for it? Do they have the
Hmm.
judgment and the context and authority to responsibly override the agent? What you don't want to do is pop an agent into, an agent that's going to make really sophisticated, fine-tuned decisions
Hmm.
and give them to a person um, who won't know how to make those distinctions. And again,
Hmm.
I'll use my Facebook advertising example,
Hmm.
right? I I don't think Harley's ever done Facebook ads management,
Hmm.
right? Maybe at some point we'll have her do that, but she hasn't ever done that before. So for me to be like, hey, I've got this agent team.
Right.
This is now your responsibility
Right.
to manage the outputs and to, review it and figure out what decisions to make is a complete mismatch because she doesn't understand the work of the agents well enough. She doesn't understand the context for it well enough. She might want to do it. She's very eager. She's always
Right.
willing to do things, right?
Right. Right.
But she doesn't see it. She doesn't get it.
Right.
She's not suited for it at the moment. And
Hmm.
as much as she might want to do it, it's not the right fit.
Right. I always talk about want it, do it, see it.
That's right.
Right. I mean, there's those three things, and that's very important. And many times it's that see it. Right. I mean, we don't see it. And not being able to see it is sometimes just an exposure. I was talking with somebody last night. We were talking about finance. Whew,
Mhm.
that's a fun dinner time conversation. I'm just kidding, but it really was great. But like it was the lens that the other person has on finance. Like I can say this. I think this doesn't look right. Like I mean, I've got exposure to finance, but I'm not a finance expert.
Right.
Like the person. So it's like I can want to do it and I can kind of see it, but I can't see it with enough confidence to say, is what the outcome that's happening here, is this right? Like, can I call the yes on it or not?
Right.
And so, that's a thing that's really important on that see it component, is to be able to have some of that experience, if you want to say, to be able to go, I don't think that looks right. And so that see it thing, it takes time to understand that sometimes.
I think one of the questions that I've been talking with some people around, particularly with recent grads or junior employees, and you say, well, what do they do if AI is doing all of this work that they used to do? What does that job look like now?
Hmm.
And I think that is exactly what the job looks
Right,
like now.
right,
You've got to teach them now, not how to do the task, but what the outcome looks like. You're now teaching judgment,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
You're not teaching tasks, you're
right,
teaching judgment. And it's a bit of a challenge because, frankly, I feel like a lot of our education system doesn't teach judgment. We don't teach towards that.
right,
We
right,
teach towards, actually, don't know what we teach towards, but,
right, yeah,
but we don't generally teach towards judgment,
mhm,
right? And I think that is probably the number one thing. If you're going to start assigning orchestrators to agents, they've got to be able to see it.
right,
They've got to have the professional judgment to
yes,
understand if what the agent is telling them or what the agent is returning
mhm,
is good, is right, is
right,
aligned with what the company is supposed to be doing.
right,
That is something an agent can't do,
mhm,
right?
mhm, right,
That's part of the responsibility of the human
right,
orchestrator.
right. If you go back to just like basic, I mean, go back to basic of times, like before the calculator, wherever that, I don't know
I
when
wasn't
before,
alive
I
yet.
was like, I don't know when before the calculator was, but I do remember my folks saying, like, you can't always use your calculator.
Hmm.
You have to know math.
Yeah.
Right? You have to know math. And so, we had flashcards and we had this and we had that. And my dad would take me to the grocery store. And every time we would buy something, I'd have to recalculate the per ounce price before we could even put it in the cart. And, I mean, my folks were very big on understanding math, which I just so much appreciate. Like as a kid, I'm like, can we just buy the canned corn, Dad? Come on. But the point is that you had to learn those things so that when you had the calculator, and if you're like, you would at least know, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. Cause I'm like saying 40 plus 40 plus 40, like, okay, that doesn't seem right that the answer's 30, right? I mean,
Right.
that's a very, very simplified example. But I think it's kind of that truth is that's that see it part is you have to have some experience in there to be able to say, when I see it, that doesn't feel right. And I need to challenge, which is the judgment piece.
Yes.
And that's so important. I mean, we've all had AI spit something back to us and you're like, no, close, but no. And that's that see it, that's that judgment. And if we just, forget that piece, which we can't, it's an important piece, right? If we forget that piece, then, we're going to have bad content coming out.
Yeah, and I mean, at best, at worst, you're going to get it making a lot of decisions that it shouldn't make
Right.
because the more you move from interactive towards autonomous,
Hmm.
right? If you've got somebody that doesn't understand the context, they don't understand what good looks like. I mean, could you imagine? Go back to finance. Like, let's imagine you had an agent that was managing approvals, and you could do this, right? You could say, "Hey, at a certain level, we want our agent to manage approvals for, I don't know, expense statements up to a certain dollar amount, as an example, right?
Hmm.
So let's pretend that's the case. And there might be reasons why you don't want to do that. We'll talk about the governance side later, but
Right.
let's just pretend that was a thing.
Right.
Okay. And all of a sudden, a bunch of small transactions came up that the agent wouldn't flag because they're in the rules
Hmm.
of the agent or in the judgment of the judgment zone of the agent. But but these transactions, maybe somebody is committing some form of fraud,
Right.
or maybe
Right.
somebody's kind of doing a lot of bleeding, and a human judgment is one that'll be like, wait a minute,
That doesn't
um,
look right.
that
Right.
why are we getting this many of this at this time? Like that doesn't make a lot of sense. Gosh, John sure is buying a lot of McDonald's, right? Like like what is going on under the hood? You
Hmm.
need the. In fact, I would go so far as to say the judgment is what we bring to the table.
Yes. Yeah.
That is
I
what
would
we
agree.
bring to the
Yeah.
table.
Hmm.
And so if you're going to put as you're starting to build out this accountability chart, that orchestrator, that ability to see it, the ability to make judgments about the work. Um, if I was to, I don't think they're equally weighted.
No, no,
That
it
is
can't
the,
be.
that is
Right.
the thing
Right. Right.
that the human needs to bring to
Right.
the table.
Right. Well, and to jump back to the hybrid accountability chart, like if you don't take the time to see it, let's just use that in this example, and see where you have your agentic workflows in your organization, right? Like we should be able to see that very visibly and know where they're working so that we can even better as humans orchestrate how those are working. But if we're not documenting them anywhere and they're just sitting off and getting done somewhere, but we don't have that documented so that we can look back and say, okay, that's the way the org's working. Not just who's in the box, but I know how the work is getting done, which is one thing your standard org charts don't do, right? Your org chart puts a name and a title in the box. It doesn't say how the work is getting done, and understanding visually how the work is getting done is going to continue to get more and more important.
Yeah, particularly because the number of black boxes that are going to be automated
Right.
it will increase.
Hmm. Hmm.
On the AI side, so on the human side, number one thing is they've got to be able to see it. They've got to see it, do it, want it, right?
Hmm.
And if that person that you're thinking about having to orchestrate a particular flow doesn't have those three things, then they shouldn't be the ones orchestrating
Right.
that flow.
Right.
You
Right.
either need to find someone else or you need to delay that flow until you've got someone that has those capabilities.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
That's really, really, really important. Because then as we get into the governance side of the agents, right, some of the decisions we're going to have to make as we move from interaction through to autonomy is number one, what data do we allow them to access? Uh, and that sounds obvious, but even within the context of data, what roles,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I have a massive ERP, I can see everything, but this person can't, and that person can't. Well, what level do you give your agents? So what data can they access? No, the second thing is which actions are they allowed to take without approval, right? Because on the one hand, you want to get enough efficiency that you don't have a human that's just sitting there being like, click, yes,
Right.
yes,
Right.
yes, 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 uh, because that point, like, yeah, it's getting done a little bit faster, but it's super, super tedious,
Hmm.
right? So you want to be thinking through what actions can you let the agent take without approval? What requires sign off? Another thing you want to be thinking through is what happens on an input that the agent wasn't designed for. So there, one of the increasing security threats people need to be aware of, and we'll talk about at some
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
is prompt injection. It's when people feed agents malicious prompts and the agents don't know the difference, right? And so as a result, the agents actually will do a thing despite, you know, again, because again, they don't know better,
Right.
right? So I'll use an example, and it was funny in retrospect, um, but it highlighted this because one of the things that we built last year on our website is we built fully. We tried to make our website fully agentified. We dialed off a little bit, but we tried. That was one of our goals.
Hmm.
Okay, and so when we did this, um, we ultimately connected our AI agent to on our website to our calendars. The idea was, again, I don't like taking a lot of quote calls. I didn't like doing a lot of these kinds of discoveries. So I wanted the agent to do all the discovery and
Right.
then only book an appointment with me after they'd qualified the person on
Right.
the website.
Right.
Okay. And we had built this and we rolled it out and it was going pretty well. And then a couple of months in, somebody came in and they, tried to convince our agent that they were like a big wig at some national company and that they needed to get on our calendar. Um, and so he was going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with our agent and trying to get our agent to book something like 100 appointments, basically blocking out all of our calendar for a quarter.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Wow.
And so, the only reason we caught it is because we have our calendars up and we started seeing appointments,
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
right? And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, what the hell is going on?
Right.
Right. And
Right.
so we go in and we can tell like that this particular agent is doing all of is doing all these appointments. And I can see the conversation thread. So we were able to shut it down. But we hadn't thought about these this
Hmm.
idea of a prompt injection. We
Right.
hadn't thought about ways that the agent, I mean, this was a year ago,
Right.
right? No,
Right.
nobody thought about it. Prompt injection wasn't even a word back then.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
so and so when this happened, it was because we hadn't thought through
Hmm.
like, well, what could go wrong? What
Right.
happens when there's an input it's not designed for?
Right.
How do you handle that? And that's a really, really important thing,
Right. Right.
especially when you start connecting these to mission critical systems.
Yeah. I mean, that how will you monitor your output quality
Yes.
is a question that has to be asked and answered.
Yes. And that's the next one.
Hmm.
How will you monitor output quality? And that is going to squarely fit with whoever the orchestrator is. That is their number one
Hmm.
role. And then finally, what would make you shut down the workflow immediately? In our case, it was seeing 30 calendar invites
Right.
right
Yeah.
away.
You're
We were
like,
like,
this
yeah,
isn't going
we,
to work.
we need to
Right.
kill that
Yeah.
agent. And so we went to the server and we just killed the agent, right?
Right.
Like it's
Right.
not, you
Right.
can't do it. But you need to think about like, well, what is the control?
Hmm.
Because once these things are running fully autonomously, what's the control at which you say, hey, gosh, something seems wrong. We need to execute a kill switch.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
how do you build the kill switch into your system?
Right.
Right. So on the human side, as you're naming your orchestrator, it's do they see it? Do they want it? Can they do it? You really, really need to make sure that they've got judgment. On the agent side, as you're thinking through assisted all the way through to autonomous, it is what data can they access and what's off limits. It's going to vary probably by agent and agent team.
Hmm.
What actions can they take without approval? What happens on input that the agents weren't designed for? How do you monitor the quality of the output? And then uh, what are the shutdown conditions that make you say we need to put the kill switch on right now so
Hmm.
that way it doesn't, Skynet and turn into
Hmm.
Terminator,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
um, when you've done those things, you'll have ideally one, named an outcome, two, named the agent team, sorry, responsible for completing that outcome, identified and qualified a human orchestrator or human supervisor who will manage the team through that outcome. And then finally, made decisions about levels of autonomy with the appropriate governance in place to make sure that you
Mhm.
don't, cause
Right.
more problems
Right.
than you solve.
Well, and I think at the end of the day, I mean, just to kind of summarize I mean, the org chart was not designed for AI. So, Compound has created a hybrid accountability chart so that we can start to see and have visibility into how the organization is working. And, you know, as we continue to work with clients, like that is a step that's very important to spend the time is to do that analysis, do that breakdown. We've got the questions now, but we've got to just at the end of the day say, how do we make this structure both visible and durable?
Hmm.
And those are at the end of the day, that's what the hybrid accountability chart and everything we talked about today is how do we make that accountable and durable? How do we start thinking about our organization's chart,
Yes.
i.e., hybrid accountability chart, so that when we start to deploy agents and we start introducing that into our workflow, that we've got it figured out and we've figured it out on the front end
Yep.
and not the back end.
Before you start getting 100 calendar invites and like,
Exactly.
why is this
Why is this
happening? And
happening?
thankfully,
Right.
it was only calendar invites and not something worse,
Right, right,
right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
As with all things, we've got a handy dandy worksheet here
We
that you
do.
can use to follow along and think through this yourself for your own organization, because we covered a lot of ground, and this
Yeah,
is going to be new ground for
right,
most of us.
right.
But one of the reasons why I love having these conversations with you, Julie, is because it feels new, but in a
Mhm,
lot of ways, it's really not. We've been doing this for a long time with humans.
mhm.
It's just that now we have to apply that same kind of thinking in a slightly different way. And frankly, we should have always been thinking about these things in the first place.
Right, 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 right. But now we have to
Now we
because
have to.
we keep going back to everybody's, I've got to do something. Well, we don't disagree. You do have to do something because of the pace that's coming at us, but let's be sure we're doing it the right way. And
That's right.
that's why we love the work that we do here. And these conversations are just so great.
So,
So
thank you for your time.
thank you, everybody. And as we close, we always like to say, let's stop transforming and let's start compounding.